Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining us today to the event Nuclear Safety and Environmental Consequences of the Russian Invasion. This event is part of the series of events between the Ukrainian and South African civil society. And today's event is organized by the Southern African Face Communities Environmental Institute, the Koeberg Alliance and Ukrainian Association of South Africa from South African side, and also our Ukrainian counterparts, the Center for Environmental Initiative, Eco Action, and Resilient Ukraine. So thanks a lot for taking time today to talk about our common planet, common environment, and also risks that Russian invasion of Ukraine poses to all our communities. So the first part of this event includes presentation from Ukrainian counterparts, and you will be able to learn about the environmental consequences of Russian invasion, as well as hear account from a nuclear engineer who've been at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power stations at the time of the invasion. The second part, we will hear reflections on this topic from South African organizations, and then there will be time to ask all different questions. This event is also streamed online to Ukrainian Association of South Africa and SAFCEI YouTube channel, and also to social media of organizing organization. So this event will be recorded in case you would like to share it afterwards. And one more detail, the first part, one of the speakers will be speaking in Ukrainian, and there is a translation ongoing. So for when you'll have to change the language to English or to Ukrainian, you'll have to push the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom to choose the language of your convenience. The second and the third part will not be translated. So for the first part, I'm just raising your awareness. And if you are going to have any challenges with finding this, the globe at the bottom of your Zoom connection, and choose interpretation. And if you press there, you can choose language, English or Ukrainian. So with no more delays, I am happy to introduce Artem Kolesnik, who is an energy policy expert at the Eco Action in Ukraine. His organization has been documenting different violations and impact of the Russian invasion since February 2022. And Artem is working also on the decommissioning of nuclear plants in Ukraine and the program of future post-war reconstruction and the introduction of sanctions against Rosatom. So he'll be able to share with us some of the insight of what is happening and what are the pressing environmental challenges that Ukraine is currently facing.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Now I'll try to share my presentation. One moment. I need host. I can't participate screen sharing.
Artem, try again. You're the host.
No, it says host disenabled.
I think the challenge that Artem is on two different devices. So maybe.
Yeah. I need without video device. It's for presentation through profile.
Maybe while we are doing the technical, finalizing the technical issues, I'll just mention that for those who are in person today at the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation, we are grateful for the foundation for providing this space. and for us to meet and also not only be online, but also meet in person in Cape Town. Then we can see your presentation.
Okay, it's good. Okay, no, 1 second, please. Okay, I can start now. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you for opportunity to speak with you today. It's nice to understand that people who are so far from you can care about your problems. Thank you for that. And of course, it's always nice to meet like-minded people. I have to apologize at once, because if the air raid starts, I will have to go to the shelter. But I returned when it is end. Where should I start? Perhaps it will important to point out the materials for this presentation are joint work of various Ukrainian organizations. At the end, I will share access to the source of the information. And also, the photo I used, the mostly taken from the media, but some of them are I made by me. Exactly like this photo on this slide. I took this photo in the village of Novy Bykiv, where my wife from. Already after the village was occupied in April last year. We have had an interesting story because the day before war, I sat down with my wife to talk about what we will do when the war started. And the plan was that I will join to territory defense, and she will go to her parents. Unfortunately, we did not have a very successful plan in this case, because my wife and her family were caught in the occupation. But at least I'm not worried about my wife while are defending the capital. In this day, no one understands what to expect. That day, most of us woke up of sound of explosion. Honestly, I didn't hear anything. I woke up by a phone call from my mother. I will not dwell on the details of the war, because the whole world was watching everything what was happening. Also, I think you already all perfectly informed about the crimes committed by the Russians. Like in this photo, the situation what we have in start of this month in Zaporizhia. What it will be about? I will focus on the source of emissions that can directly be attributed to the war. First, we look to the emission due to millions of Ukrainians fleeing their houses, enter within the country, and literally displaced person or aborted. Second, we look at the emission cases by warfare and the result of both of the Russian army attacking Ukrainian and Ukrainian army defending country in response. An assessment, it made the emission due the fire cases by fighting in the conflict zone. Also, an assessment, it made the future emission from reconstruction or destroying or damaging civilian infrastructure. At least, but not least, talk about the threat of the nuclear disaster caused by Russia. Also on the screen, you can see a map what we create in our organization when we complete, unite together all crimes of Russia. You can go and see it. We have QR code this in the slide, and you can
just Artem, your presentation is not moving, just to let you know that it's still
in the... sorry. It's good that you said because I don't see it. 1 second. Maybe I try share another way. Share new.
Maybe just move slide with the mouse like you are doing now. I think that's fine.
Okay, maybe.
Now we're on 24th. Yeah, now let's press.
Okay. Some problem. I don't understand why. 1 second, please. Sorry.
Artem, let's move on. Just move with the mouse to the next slide. I think
it's not that way problem. I figured it out. 1 second, please. Oh, now it's work. Yes, you see changes.
So it's not playing as presentation from the beginning, but you can move. Yes, if you move the mouse, we can. Yes, now it's good. Thank you.
Yeah. It's problem because I have to monitor, and maybe I share not right away.
Yes, I think we have only 15 more minutes for your presentation, so
okay,
maybe we should move on.
I showed the slide when I tell about the crimes Russian. You can go to see it. Okay. The next step, what I want to say, it's about immediately after measure on February, many Ukrainians decide to leave their homes. The majority of the people we start saying in Ukrainians are internally displaced person, ADPS, or went abroad to the other European country or even future. Also here you the approximated calculations that you can see. It is also important to say some of the refugees came back after the Russian forces had to return, or cases posing the immediately of population. Going to the next. Now some technical details. Fossil fuels are an essential component of military operation as they are used by tanks and armored vehicles, aircraft, other military vehicles, as well as by logistic vehicles carrying munitions, soldiers, food, and other general cargoes. Fuel is used during the mobilization of forces, operations, movement, relocation, and even standby time. For instance, all tanks and armored fighting vehicles do not have auxiliary power needs to run for rechanging the battery, and my engineers have to run periodically to recharge the battery. Also, apart from military vehicles and trucks, fuel also used by civilian vehicles involved in war-related activities. It's emergency services, medical vehicles, movement related to evacuation, rebuilding supply chains, and use of factors to recover part of damaged vehicles. Fuel storage facilities are also often targeted by missiles or drone attacks to undermine the ability to sustain military operation. You can also see what main problem we have now. Next slide is about fires that cases until war. You can see the whole situation, what we have during the war start. It's quite obvious from the above that the warfare led to significant increase in both of the number and area of fires. Also, destroyed and damaged civilian infrastructure, an important component of the, maybe the most important component of the climate damages caused by Russian invasion in Ukraine. Some of the repair works will happen with the war still ongoing, but the majority of the rebuilding or reconstruction will happen after the end of the war. The rehabilitation works will demand a significant amount of construction materials. The transportation of these materials to construction sites and the construction activities will require energy. All in all, reconstruction Ukraine will cause a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Ukrainian government state collected and assessed in a systematic way information about damages or destroyed facilities soon after the beginning of the war. But in fact, we don't know the exact number because in practically impossible to count the cities under occupation. According to a ironic joke of Ukrainian in Twitter, in this photo you are not seeing Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings. This is a city that was destroyed by the Russians. Now in this moment, in this city, one who stand and fight, like all you can hear is Bakhmut. This city is called Marinka in Donetsk region. As seen from the above, the reconstruction of civilian infrastructure account for the largest share of emission, with 15% of the total emission. Fires involved forced built up areas up to required. Almost 10% is estimated to be the warfare. Also, soil is a very important topic for everyone, every Ukrainians. Unfortunately, I don't know how it's accepted in your country, but in our country there is such thing as croft or backyard garden, which almost not everyone has or has relatives who have them, and very often there are news about how farmers are blown up by mines left by Russian. And in the end, the world understands the importance of Ukrainian grains. Now you can see the statistic that I not tell about you. Okay, now go far. Now let's move to the problem that have never been seen in human history. On the night of March, as a result of Russian scale invasion, the world sees the first case in world history when military one of the country attacked and seized an operating nuclear plant of another country. As a result of the action, the Zaporizhian nuclear power plant suffered significant damages and survived fires. As a result, some power units were stopped. The station staff minded the operation and safety to the station, regardless of the presence of Russians there. All these events pose too serious that the nuclear security of the region and calls case a new man-made environmental and humanical disaster. They become a heritage of the events that will take place during the next year to the Zaporizhian nuclear power plant. Of course, there is also a separate topic of the capture of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, but due to the lack of time and the fact is this already controlled by Ukraine, in short, the worst thing that Russia did there was to dig in the forest, call it Rudy forest, and received a large dose of radiation to themselves. I think, of course, you should hear about such citation from the next speaker, Oleg, who is a direct participant in this event. Such of crimes by Russians. Recently, it was related that the Russian mined the Kakhovska station and dumping water from the Kakhovska reservoir, where the station takes water for the cooling system. And this fact of one of the Russian crimes about the personnel in the station. This can you see? This is virtual modeling was performed by specialists of Ukrainian Hydrometeorological Institute and the State of Energy Service of Ukraine and the National Academy of Science of Ukraine. And some fact about Zaporizhia nuclear station. The area of the explosion zone around the Zaporizhia and NP can be about 40,000 square meters. This is almost 10 times larger than the Chernobyl exclusion zone. No, and also Dnipro River. It's one of the system that can be radiation contamination will be spread to the Dnipro, Black Sea, and Azov Sea. What else can I add? We need any help and support because we Ukrainians are fighting for our surviving. surviving. And the war, enlightened by the Russian, affects all of people in the world. I think just not everyone wants to accept the challenges of this problem. Well, thank you all for your attention. As promises, here you will find the research of which the information I collect was based. Explicitly with regards to the study of the impact on ecology. There you will find the methodology and the entire evidence base. Yeah, and that's how I answered all possible questions for me. Thank you again, and I will pass the word on.
Thanks a lot, Artem, for the presentation and for raising awareness about the greenhouse gases emission linked to the migration of people and movement of munition. Also, you spoke about destroyed infrastructure and environmental hazards linked to that, and the risk for agricultural fields and destroyed habitats for wildlife. And those who can see this link, you can see actually all the documented over 900 cases of environmental challenges that Ukraine is facing as a result of this invasion. I think there was a question about depleted uranium and environmental risks linked to that. I don't know, Artem, if you want to quickly answer that question. And the second question was linked to IAEA mission at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station. But I think our next speaker, Oleg Tudor, he will cover that topic. So I think Artem doesn't have to answer that. We will listen to Oleg's talk and then take more questions.
Can you please repeat the first questions? Maybe when I can find it in chat. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question was about depleted uranium, zbijany uran, and potential contamination linked to that.
Sorry, but we decided to not discuss this in our organization in public because we do not want to criticize the weapon what we take from our islands. It's not. I mean, I have my personality thing, but I do not want to discuss this question. And also, it's very technical. We must.
Okay, thanks a lot, Artem. Artem will be with us until the end of the event. So if you have questions later on, you'll still be able to ask them to Artem, as we'll have hopefully some time for Q&A sessions.
Yeah, maybe if people have some questions, they can write in chat and I try answering there.
Yes, we can also do that. You can type your questions in chats, and if Artem doesn't answer them in writing, we can also talk about them. And our next speaker is Oleg Tudor. Oleg is a nuclear engineer with many decades of experience of working at the nuclear power station, more specifically at the Zaporizhzhia power stations. He was managing over 700 operators and that manage 6 reactors. So this is the largest nuclear power stations in Europe. Oleg was there at the time of the invasion, and please, Oleg, you witnessed everything that was happening with your own eyes. Oleg stayed there until August 2022. So we are very interested to hear your experience. And Oleg going to be speaking in Ukrainian. So if you would like to hear English translation, please at the bottom, you press interpretation, looks like a globe, and you can choose the language that you want to listen in between Ukrainian and English. Oleg, you can start.
Доброго дня, шановні. Я дуже вдячний всім за нагоду прийняти участь в цьому поважному зібранні, в цій конференції. Я трошки хочу сказати про себе. Так, дійсно, вже 37 років повинно було виповнитися в цьому році, як я працюю на Запорізькій станції. І я був керівником експлуатаційного підрозділу, який займався експлуатацією усіх 6 реакторів і 6 енергоблоків. І в мене, в моєму підпорядкуванні ще були 200 ліцензованих операторів, які мали згоду згідно ліцензіями, які видав їм національний регулятор, здійснювати управління ядерним реактором. Це унікальна кількість людей, це унікальний потенціал людський, інтелектуальний, і ми не повинні його втратити для нашої України. Так, з перших днів, а точніше буде сказати, що у ніч захоплення я в прямому етері спостерігав через відеотрансляцію камери, яка була встановлена на адміністративній будівлі нашої станції, як відбувалось захоплення та обстріли. І це протягом відбувалось ночі 4 березня, десь з 12 ночі і до начала 5 ранку 4 березня. Це дуже жахливі спогади, дуже жахливі кадри. І, як сказав Артем, так, це вперше в історії людства таке відбулося, що збройна армія іншої держави, агресора, обстрілювала прямою наводкою з артилерії, з ракетних установок, з танків, іншої важкої техніки і стрілецької зброї, будівлі, споруди, енергоблоки мирної української атомної електричної станції. Так, вона залишається найпотужнішою станцією Європи, 6 енергоблоків з сумарною потужністю 6 мільйонів кіловат. І, до речі, ще вона 4-та у світі по потужності. Ну і дійсно, з перших днів я мав таку печальну нагоду бачити, що це таке руський мір, який вони принесли. Я бачив з першого дня ці озброєні військові, які захопили станцію і устроїли своє чергування на ній. Десь 500 зброєних вояків завезли свою важку техніку, зброю, вибухівку і на територію станції, і в споруди атомних енергоблоків. І це дійсно велика небезпека для людства. Я трошки пізніше про це розкажу ще. Але те, що я бачив, те, що передшествувало вторгненню, захопленню, це спроби мирного протесту, які мешканці Енергодару, це місто при атомній станції, Вони виходили на зустріч колоннам танків, колонам ворога, які налічували до 100 одиниць техніки важкої. І не давали протяг там 2-3 днів захопити Енергодар, захопити місто, але ж увечері 3 березня вони пішли на штурм, обстріляли цей мітинг, ці протести, розбили барикаду, яку звели наші захисники, і їм вдалося пройти до міста і почати захоплення станції. І з перших, вже десь через тиждень, як вони захопили, почались тортури над персоналом. Люди зникали з робочих місць, зникали з вулиць. Ворог захоплював тих, хто приймав участь у цьому мітингу, у інших мітингах протесту, які відбувалися в Енергодарі до певного там числа. Так, 9 березня ми ще виходили з українськими прапорами до монументу, до пам'ятнику Тараса Шевченка і показували ворогу, що ми незламні, що ми українці. Але ж все це фільмувалось, і потім це сталося свідченням того, що люди приймали участь, і вони вираховували, вичисляли цих людей, і потім хватали їх і бросали, кидали в підвали, де тримали неділями, а деякі і місяцями, і ніхто не знав, що з цими людьми, в якому вони стані. І майже всі повернулися, але стан їх дійсно був жахливий. Я, власне, знаю декількох таких людей, які розказували про тортури, про питки, комусь ламали ребра, комусь рвали сухожилля, когось питали струмом електричним. Все для того, щоб люди змінили свої погляди. Бо зайшла інша держава зі своєю мовою, зі своєю історією, культурою, і все українське було заборонено. Нам заборонялось розмовляти на рідній мові, нам заборонялось святкувати наші свята, і це було ще більш жахливо. Що стосується того, що відбувалося на станції, я був свідком того, я, як розповів, керував підрозділом, і до мене приходять, кажуть, що нашого співробітника вони затримали і побили дуже сильно. Він пройшов через прохідну і став чекати свого товариша, який проходив, і воєнний підійшов до нього і сказав, що ти нас рахуєш, ти намагаєшся запам'ятати наше обличчя, і завів його під сходи, і там дуже сильно побив. І таких прикладів було дуже, дуже багато, і це дійсно так. Навіть словами не передати ту атмосферу, яка всі ці, вже більше року вже панує в Енергодарі. Це було квітуче місто, більше 50 тисяч мешканців. Зараз воно налічує десь 10 тисяч мешканців з тих, хто не може виїхати, бо заборонено виїжджати. І люди, і працівники станції, хто ще там залишився. І найстрашніше це те, що ці дії здійснила держава, страна, мова йде про Росію, яка є членом МАГАТЕ і однією державою-засновником цієї поважної міжнародної організації. Вона має дуже великий вплив на МАГАТЕ, Представники Росії є в керівних органах і генерального директора МАГАТЕ замом. Тому вони намагаються залишитись в цій організації. Для чого їм потрібно? Ну, я трошки знаю то, що відбувалось не так давно в Південній Африці, що Росія запропонувала уряду і президенту збудувати дуже велику атомну електростанцію в Південній Африці. Але ж я також знаю, що ці перемовини вони проходили за закритими дверима, і люди не узнали, не мали нагоди знати, які умови були цих домовленостей. Для чого Росія це? Росія намагається розширювати свій політичний вплив на країни по всьому світу. Вона вирішила, що вона є державою, яка може впливати на світовий порядок, і в тому числі за рахунок таких невигідних для держав договорів, ну, як намагалась зробити з Південною Африкою. Україна має гіркий досвід цього. Всі атомні енергоблоки, а їх 15 на території України, ну, працюючи, вони були построєні по радянським, по російським технологіям. І ми мали такий дуже досвід, коли в 2000-х роках, початку 2000-х, в кінці 90-х, початку 2000-х, Росія нам відмовилась поставляти паливо для наших станцій. Тобто вона шантажувала не поставками, зривом договорів там під якимись предлогами, для того, щоб Україна йшла на домовленості, на політичні якісь домовленості. Тобто я доводжу до того, що Росія використовує і атомну енергетику, розвиток атомної енергетики в странах як такі речах впливу, речах шантажу на ці страни, для того, щоб вони були союзні до Росії. Тому ну, дуже потрібно, щоб дуже зважено спільнота Південної Африки розглядала такі намагання Росії. Я ще хочу сказати, ну, добавок до того, що сказав Артем, про екологічні наслідки і про ризики, які зараз існують на станції. Ви можете знати про це, що атомна станція – це не є таке виробництво, яке можна закрити на замок, вимикнути світло і піти звідти, і нічого не робити, нічого там не станеться. Вона потребує кожного дня, кожної секунди часу роботи і забезпечення ядерної та радіаційної безпеки. Тому персонал повинен там бути завжди, і повинно бути живлення всіх пристроїв і механізмів, які відводять тепло від ядерних реакторів, від палива, яке знаходиться в ядерних реакторах та в басейнах витримки енергоблоків. І я повинен сказати, що зараз станція знаходиться в дуже жахливому стані. Це живлення зараз відбувається лише по одної лінії, яка йде через Дніпро, через Каховське водосховище з України. І Україна всі ці дні, починаючи з того моменту, коли, ну це з початку вересня, коли станція перестала виробляти електрику в енергосистему України, вона живить власні потреби станції. Це щогодинно 100 МВт електрики. Це дуже велика цифра. Що буде, якщо зникне ця електрика? Зупиняться механізми, які охолоджують, працюють, щоб охолоджувати паливо в реакторах на енергоблоках. Є аварійні дизельні генератори, які автоматично вмикаються, але вони мають запас палива лише десь на 10 діб. Після чого, якщо воно буде витрачено, а Україна не має змоги постачати це паливо дизельне, зупиняться ці механізми, і ми чекаємо на розвиток аварії. Паливо це буде, температура підвищуватися, вода буде випаровуватися, і почне плавитись і саме паливо, і потім і корпус реактора прогорить, і паливо вийде зовні і буде прожигати і бетон, споруди реакторного відділення. І це глобальна ядерна радіаційна, з радіаційними наслідками катастрофа. І правильно казав Артем, що поруч ґрунтові води Дніпра, які винесуть цей бруд радіоактивний і не тільки в Чорне море, а й в Середземне море, бо це Чорне море є басейн Середземного моря. І це катастрофа для всієї Європи. Ще я можу сказати те, що не беруть, не враховують екологи. Це ще екологічне забруднення території Південної України, яка є житницею України. Житницею зараз ми бачимо і Африки у тому числі. Це зернова угода, по якої Україна транспортує зерно в тому числі і в Африку. І Україна не зможе виробляти цього зерна, а це означає голод в тому регіоні, де знаходиться, в Африці, де є і Південна Африка теж. І вона також відчує цей вплив. Так що ризики дуже великі. Ще є ризик в тому, що примушають персонал до підписання контрактів з Росією, угод про співпрацю, про працевлаштування у російській компанії. Це нонсенс. Нас брали на працю українська компанія. Чому нас українська компанія не звільнила, чому персонал буде працювати на Росію? І з цим персоналом вони вимикають доступ до станції, тобто блокують пропуска, і персонал не може зайти на станцію і виконувати свої обов'язки. До чого це приводить? Це приводить до того, що є нестача людей, нестача фахівців, які повинні контролювати і забезпечувати ядерну та радіаційну безпеку. І вони набирають просто, як кажуть, з вулиці беруть людей, які ніколи не розумілись в цій справі. Вони не знають, що таке ядерна енергетика, що таке радіаційна ядерна безпека. І це ще небезпека, що ми знизили дуже фаховий стан тих людей.
Пане Олеже, даруйте, переб'ю вас, але ми дуже по часу перебираємо, що можна закінчувати, щоб був ще час для запитань. Дякую.
Добре. Є дуже багато чого можна ще сказати. Дійсно, часу не вистачає, тому теж я готовий до питань, які може виникнути. Я на останнє хочу сказати, що ми зараз є свідками того, що відбувається в Україні. Це війна проти українського народу, проти людства, бо порушуються всі закони людності. І мало того, порушується ядерне законодавство, світове ядерне законодавство. Тому я дуже прошу зважено відноситись до будь-яких контактів з Росією, поважно південно-африканських колег. І хочу сказати, що Росія – це втілення світове зло. І, на мою думку, зло повинно бути покарано. І моя місія і в тому теж зараз состоїть в тому, щоб привести до цього. Дякую за увагу.
Oleg, thank you very much for sharing your expertise, but also sharing your trauma about what you witnessed and what you personally had to go through. I think we have a few questions here that people are asking about commenting that there was a Russian organization, Ecodefense, that has exposed the nuclear deal in South Africa, and they had to flee Russia simply because they were listed as a foreign agent, and it was not safe for them to stay any longer in Russia. And there was also a question about what you think are the risks for South Africa, because currently South Africa is closely aiming to close ties with Russia. Do you think there is a risk for weapons to be here, or further militarization, or what do you think are the risks linked to South Africa collaborating with Russia?
Можна відповідати? Я маю, звісно, власну думку на це питання. Це справа лише уряду та народу Південної Африки, з ким співпрацювати, але я б хотів сказати те, що зараз пана Путіна визнано військовим злочинцем, і більше 120 країн світу підтримало це і має його заарештувати, щоб доставити в суд в Гаазі. Це багато про що каже. Щодо будівництва станції, я впевнений, що за будівництвом станції і в тих умовах, які були пред'явлені до Південно-Африканської Республіки, є і корупційна складова, і є і питання розміщення військових баз Росії, бо Південна Африка займає дуже вигідне геополітичне таке розташування і географічне розташування. І, що казати, має дуже корисних копалин і є таке коштовним дуже містом на континенті, взагалі в світі. Тому цим і пояснюється цей інтерес, який Росія пред'являла до Південно-Африканської Республіки.
Oleg, thanks a lot. Also, thank you very much to Oksana for the translation. Unfortunately, our time is pressing, but I hope we can organize another event with Oleg separately, because just the wealth of knowledge that Oleg can share with us. We will now move to our South African partners, and I'm sharing the floor to Lydia, who's going to be facilitating the second part of the meeting.
Thank you, Zorinka. I'm here today as a spokesperson for Koeberg Alert Alliance, and it is my pleasure to introduce Johansi van Wyk, who is at UNISA South Africa.
Thanks a lot. Johansi is going to be talking about risks to international governance.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Zorinka and Madam Chair, I would like to share my screen if that is possible.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think you should be able to do that, Johansi. We can see it.
Thank you very much. Zorinka, once again, thank you very much for your kind invitation to participate in this very, very important webinar, and also to be participating with Ukrainians is a sobering but also a great privilege. Thank you so much for that. And I wish to express my sincere solidarity with the people of Ukraine as they go through this very difficult time. I would like to say, to start off with by saying, is that we know that there are a number of nuclear norms and obligations that states have, but this seems to have been inefficient, particularly at the time that we are living in. The Global Atoms for Peaceful Uses architect remains a work in progress. And as much as we have certain taboos regarding the use of nuclear weapons, we see new taboos are emerging. One of these being the weaponization of nuclear facilities. We know that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons have brought us innovation regarding the humanitarian impact, redress, and environmental remedies that is instructive. But surely we need to reconsider international criminal law and the laws of war as they particularly pertain to nuclear facilities. Ukraine has been and remains a Russian nuclear sacrifice zone with domestic, global, and necropolitical implications, and I'll get to that. And of course, there are severe implications for South Africa. So what we see in the case is that the global normative conversion and obligation, we see that some of the Soviet Union and its successor state, Russia, has made some significant contributions to our understanding of the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. But of course, as the South African singer Johnny Clegg sings, there is a ghost in the atom. Whereas the previous behavior has contributed to global nuclear concerns, and it continues to present us, this is Russia, with global insecurities. We see that there are nuclear apartheid that continues, and also there is a sense of techno-nationalism that drives states, particularly it seems in the position of Russia, that it aims to converge, not with what is the international obligations. What we see then is that there is continued selective application with some gains, but surely there remains a great love for nuclear energy and the weapons thereof, and the weaponization of thereof, as previous speakers have indicated. So the global nuclear governance and the conversions and architecture are governed by a number of treaties, institutions, zones of exclusion, days to commemorate this, but also by the appointment of special rapporteurs. But we know that all of this has an implication for state sovereignty. We also know that nuclear taboos have been settled, in other words, what states do not need to do, but there seems to be a contradiction remaining. Laws of war, how can you have certain laws and expect people to to be compliant when there is a war raging. And we've seen that these laws of war that are legalized are, for example, not applied within Ukraine. We see the proliferation of nuclear weapons still continuing. We see also that there has been a escalation of the rhetoric. And what we have also seen is after the TPNW, we see with particular focus on Ukraine, the 7 pillars that the IAEA have reminded us to keep the nuclear integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine intact. I'm mindful of our time, but let me just quickly remind ourselves of what it is that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons teaches us, but also as much as it relates to nuclear weapons, it is still about nuclear energy gone wrong. It reminds us of the catastrophic humanitarian consequences, and my fonts in bold refer to it that any radioactive accident as it relates to Ukraine will increase the number of the global hibakusha. As we know, these are the survivors of nuclear weapons and exposure thereto. We will also know that there is an enduring impact. And as much as there is a prohibition of using nuclear weapons, the threat thereof, we see that this is an issue that continues. And of course, the treaty also teaches us that there must be victim assistance and environmental remediation. And this can serve as a blueprint for the international community going forward. I want to introduce the concept of a sacrifice zone and then move on to necropolitics as an indication of the global normative developments vis-a-vis what has been happening recently in terms of nuclear energy, but also then make the case of why I see Ukraine as one of the sacrifice zones of Moscow. So what we see here is the academic reference to what is a sacrifice zone. So one area of definition would be that it is an area rendered uninhabitable by nuclear weapons testing that caused high and lasting levels of radiation. So not specifically only to test, but an exposure to radiation. We see that this idea has gained traction, especially in the UN, where it has appointed a UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, and a UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights. In other words, we know that any toxic environment, and our previous speakers have alluded to that, will not be able to produce food. There will not be agricultural production that can take place, and most of all, it will have an enduring consequence. These are some of African literature on Africa, and I want to introduce the idea of what is a nuclear sacrifice zone. In other words, these are communities that shoulder more than their fair share of environmental harms related to the pollution, contamination, toxic waste, and heavy industry, particularly within the nuclear energy environment. Fukushima, for example, has been described as one. But my argument is, and these are the lessons that we need to draw here in terms of global governance, my point is that Ukraine is Moscow's nuclear sacrifice zone. We know that even before Chernobyl has occurred, we know that there are a spatial element to these nuclear sacrifice zones. There are zones of exception and zones of life and death. And ironically, Russia and its troops have been exposed to radioactive material. But this is also existential for Russia, that it sees this techno-nationalism as part of its identity and pride, to the detriment of the existence of Ukraine. But there is also then a growing number of Moscow's Hibakusha in its nuclear borderlands, especially in those zones where the Soviet Union tested nuclear weapons, Kazakhstan and some of the other areas also in Ukraine. So there is an element of necropolitics, and I will return to this term later on. So what we see is that there are also special spatial political designations. Ukraine will forever be known as Chernobyl, the place where that occurred. Names such as Zaporizhzhia will forever be part of this sacrifice zone in history. But also then the special political designations with this international focus on this ideal zone of protection. We've seen that the Chernobyl zone has been proposed as a UNESCO heritage site to serve as a warning. Sadly, it has not, because we know that Chernobyl, and even before that, has been a dress rehearsal for what was happening. Poor decision-making, a denial of responsibility, poor communication. These are exactly the things that have resulted us where we are currently. So the war in Ukraine is also, as our previous speakers have indicated, an environmental war that also shows us the spatial element of war, the exposure to nuclear facilities, but also the focus on nuclear facility. And we know that the character of such a environmental war is that it will be an exposure. It has a temporal element, which means that our medicine, even in the 21st century, is not optimally able to prevent the exposure. And of course, radioactivity, whether it's exposure actually or potential, it creates a sense of fear. And most worryingly has been the weaponization of the environment and the landscape by creating zones that are inaccessible, by occupying these specific installations. And what follows is a slow violence, not only on the land within Ukraine, but also a slow political and physical depth, or at least terminal illness. And both our previous speakers have referred to the impact, the environmental impact that is already present in Ukraine. So this becomes an intergenerational effect. And then, of course, what is part of these sacrifice zones is the sacrifice. Ukraine is standing up for civilization, for Europe, but also it is seen by Russia as a sacrifice to unite what it seems or regard as part of what is Russia. And of course, then it is also the sacrifice for what we call necropolitics. So how do we understand this concept? Necro referring to death and dying. Of course, just referring to some academic literature, Achille Mbembe has taken the term necropolitics as an expansion from Foucault's biopolitics and Frantz Fanon's pharmacon. Subsequently, other scholars have also referred to this, is that there is a toxicity of imagination and place and body. And this is what necropolitics does, that you are exposed to an environment that gives death of ideals, imagination, but also that is killing an environment and ultimately bodies. In South Africa, we also have nuclear politics at play, sadly so, around sacrifice zones, Koeberg nuclear power station. We bury nuclear waste, which is also reference to necropolitics. And then, of course, the element of race, gender, and colonialism that we have seen playing out in this current war. The focus on Slavic brotherhood, the unification of Ukraine with Russia, and the reference to Nazis. All of this plays into this argument that what we see now is an instance of necropolitics. But for South Africa, and Madam Chair, I'm almost done. What we see here is that the Ukraine war has become a globalized effect, a portmanteau of global and local. For South Africa, the implication is long-term, is that there are international perceptions that says that South Africa remains supportive of Russia. We've already seen some long-term consequences and punitive actions, name-calling, trade issues with the European Union. But there seems also that South Africa owns lots of rubles to Russia. And Oleg has referred to that there is a liberation debt of the Soviet Union harboring South African freedom fighters. But that was the Soviet Union. It's not supposed to exist anymore, but it does still in the imagination. Oleg has referred to the so-called nuclear deal, which one of the organizers of today's event has exposed. And there also has been a number of Moscow mules from South Africa, where and to South Africa, where money has flown from Moscow to the ANC, the ruling party. We've seen that in state capture, we see that in money laundering, and in fact, recently with the revelation of, in fact, the ANC's own admission of receiving money from Russian oligarch Viktor Vekselberg, 15 million South African rand to the ANC that was reported to our elections committee. But of course, the environmental issues, and this is where perhaps South Africa should remind itself of its own history and the commonalities that we experience, or at least that we do have with Ukraine, is the fact that we had both nuclear weapons, and both of these states through a long history dismantled and disarmed itself. But Oleg has referred to the secrecy around nuclear politics and nuclear energy. And sadly, this continues. And the fine print of the nuclear deal has ultimately said that it will not be to the South African advantage. And then, of course, the threatening rhetoric that we see from Moscow is echoed in South Africa foreign policy, where there is threats expressed in terms of South Africa's foreign policies independent, that it strives for progressive internationalism, that it is non-aligned, and that it has a sense of solidarity to those that has been good during the liberation movement. But now, what happens to our foreign policy and diplomacy of Ubuntu? And for those non-South Africans participating, Ubuntu is a principle of I am my brother's or my sister's keeper. I have to look out. It is a diplomacy of caring, which sadly we do not see in practice. So in conclusion, Madam Chair, is what will we see beyond Ukraine and in future? Of course, we see that necropolitics will continue to play out, because what Ukraine is experiencing today is likely to continue for decades. Hence, it will also be the global community's existential threat and the wake-up call. There is no medical facilities all over. Low exposure is still exposure. And we must realize that nuclear techno-aesthetics and techno-nationalism is a very dangerous element, in that it is not only the design of these facilities that are impressive, but they also represent pride and the ultimate of what science can achieve. But also in South Africa, and the global in community must also take serious note of what is the sacrifice that Ukraine and its exposure to the war and experience of the war, and particularly the nuclear-related aspects, is what is happening. Too many lives are lost for Russia, and in South Africa, too many lives are lost for progress and jobs by continuing with these sacrifice on. And ultimately, too many lives are lost for Ukraine. But the response has been, do not threaten the bear or the people. But sadly, the international obligation, as has been seen in so many of the global architecture relating to nuclear safety and security, seemingly now has been extended and is challenged beyond. There is still that element of exposure, and the weaponization of a nuclear facility and these sacrifice zones, even Chernobyl, is a clear departure from what we've seen previously. There is a global witnessing of crimes, of nuclear crimes, and through social media, we are made aware of these. Geographically, Ukraine also tells the story of the risks associated with war, the toxicity, and the need for education in South Africa. So at least that there is that commonality of understanding of the dangers of not tending to the land. President Putin has been declared a war criminal, but we must also develop international law. And this is where civil society must fight as hard as it can, is to make nuclear crimes part of the international criminal system, that it must not be a crime that is not defined. And this is where innovation and legal innovation can take place. And lastly, what we've seen here is the coloniality of war and of imposed conflict, of the manipulation of race and the idea of unification, but not recognizing the sovereignty. And of course, the maintenance of colonial infrastructure. And to some extent, Russia has underestimated Chernobyl as one of its colonial infrastructures that sadly came to bite itself. And these are the kinds of things that South Africa should learn from this event. And we can only do it if we understand the difficult concepts and the difficult experience of Ukrainians. And I thank Dzvenka, you, and of course your colleagues for presenting today. And I hope we can continue this discussion during Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jansi, for the very wonderful and insightful presentation. Thank you so much, and we will continue the conversation. And as we reflect further on, what does the Russian invasion means for South Africa and the environment and nuclear safety, it is now my turn to present on safety. Difference in there. Let's get to the third slide. Instead. No. Maybe just go to the slide on that. This number 3. Yeah. Oh, no, oh yes, it has. Okay. Technical. Yeah, technical glitches. We are well aware of that. Good afternoon again. My name is Lydia Peterson, and I'm the spokesperson for Koeberg Alert Alliance. And we are here today to talk about the safety aspects and also the relations with Russia and the consequences of it. As we can see, we're talking about the defense in depth and what can actually go wrong. So first of all,
anything can go wrong. If the cooling pumps stop working. Yes. No, it is the first line, the first two concepts. That's the only one that's showing. Yeah.
Okay.
So if the cooling pumps stop working, like we've seen at Fukushima, what other power sources are there? We can rely upon the grid. We can also rely upon Acacia, which is a dedicated line in the line of defense for the power utility for Koeberg. And then there are generators and diesel tanks. So if we look further as to what can really happen, it means that our our defense line, it should be able to sustain any eventuality. Next slide, please. The common cause failures. One cause can be more than one failure. If we look at the Ukrainian invasion, there are several factors that can start a sequence. An earthquake can damage the grid and the road. So what about the diesel deliveries? How did that come about to get to the plant in that event? There can be civil unrest as well. We can see that it's happening here in South Africa. We are living in a volatile state, and staff access. How does the staff get to the power plant to actually see that everything is running according to plan? What about the diesel deliveries? They might not be able, there would be road blockages. Like we said, there can be earthquakes that can damage the roads. Nothing can get to the power plant for that to be working according to what is needed there. Next slide, please. So we look at the parallels. The parallels and then the grid unreliability. The next slide, please. The grid unreliability. If we look at the ZNPP plant, with the shelling and going around at the plant, there was a countdown that was, I think it was about a month or so ago, where the amount of diesel available was at 11 days. So we're looking at also if the grid is unreliable and unstable and getting these diesel supplies to the grid, it could mean that it will never reach there. Is there a chance of our grid also collapsing? Of course there is. And it's estimated to be rejoined to the grid in about 14 days. And is it safe for us to have a grid collapse and can only be restarted in about 14 days? Next slide, please. This is also a report by the US warned stakeholders to prepare itself here in South Africa for a total grid collapse. On site at Koeberg, there are on-site generators. These, according to Eskom, are tested regularly. But what happens if it is needed for an extended time during this fragile and volatile times where this event might occur? The diesel shortages, like we said, that anything can happen. There could be a road closure, there could be civil unrest, there could be an earthquake. So, and extreme weather events. So all this can mean flooding, it can be road closures. So in that event, how does the diesel get to the plant? So all these events that's taking place prohibits us from having to sit with a total grid collapse. Also, there is an article that Eskom actually said that we have a diesel shortage, and this is the situation that we are at. Next, please. So now we can look at the possible geopolitical consequences of doing business with Russia. So if we look at secondary sanctions, what is the risk of doing business with Russia? And already there was a license that was not renewed between the United States and South Africa, which is the procurement of nuclear fuel. At risk will be the AGOA, which is a treaty between the United States and South Africa for export. Also at risk is the EU trade, and also our jet funding. These are all at risk because of the intention, perhaps, of us doing business with Russia. An article laying out the influential Ukraine leaders urges the US to impose sanctions on other countries. So we are, when we talk about secondary sanctions, we are actually at risk there as well. This fuel license that I just alluded to, it's the US national regulator, which has suspended the license between South Africa and the US. So Eskom says that we have enough nuclear fuel for now. But if the plant is extended, where will we find the fuel? So we will have to find other sources. And I have to say that Rosatom is willing to supply that. NECSA has requested a 3 billion per year from the National Fiscus for a MPR. A request for information was issued on the 6th of February, 2022. And then on the 27th of February, that was extended. So there's a significance between the time frame of issuing as well as extending. And this was the time that Russia invaded the Ukraine. And if we look at all this and we link it up, we will also still be saying that Rosatom is willing to supply that MPR for South Africa. And this is just the model that was put together by NECSA and confirming that the billion rands per year, 1 billion rand per year for 10 years, and also the 1 billion rand for 8 years for the first SMR at Palindaba. So we look further to more spent fuel, which will be accumulated at Koeberg nuclear plant. If the lifetime extension is granted, we look at about 20 years or more. The spent fuel is the only source of plutonium, and it's the best material for the making of nuclear arms. So what plans does Koeberg have for the spent fuel? I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago and with Eskom and the National Nuclear Regulator, where I put a question to the nuclear chief officer of Koeberg, and I asked him, what if this plant is being extended for another operation for another 20 years, what will happen to the spent fuel? And he looked directly at me and he said that there are other options, but it's too early to speculate. I said, what other options would there be? Could we be talking about reprocessing? Because I know that Eskom is virtually bankrupt. They're getting bailed out every year. So what other options are there? And he says that, and I said, where would you be storing this fuel? And he said, well, at the moment, it will be stored on site until we figure out what to do with it. And I kept on pushing him for an answer. And that was the answer that I got, that Eskom is thinking of having other options, but it is too early to speculate at what they might be. So looking at the relations that South Africa has with Russia, it can mean that the reliance on Russia that South Africa has might continue. And if we look at the possibility of what we have, which is the plutonium, and what Russia can give to us, which is the multi-purpose reactor, it could mean the nuclear fuel. So what does that mean? So we're opening the discussion when we say that there are possibilities. If we look at a relationship with Russia, because of this, where do we stand from here on? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lydia. I think we're going to take all questions to all the speakers after this section. So Francesca De Gasparis from SAFCEI.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the time. I feel that really honored to be on this panel with so many very knowledgeable and expert contributions. And it was incredibly interesting to hear the contributions from Ukraine as well as from South Africa, and I've learned a great deal this afternoon. So thank you so much. Really shocking statistics were shared of how people have been displaced in Ukraine by the invasion and the environmental and climate impacts to nature and to infrastructure. Those are very stark figures and really gave pause to the huge disaster that is happening in Ukraine right now as we sit here. And I just want to also say that we are standing in solidarity with the Ukrainian people, and we support all of Ukraine during this time of crisis. And yeah, just when you combine that with this issue of nuclear power stations and all the implications of that, there are some very deep and dark issues that we're dealing with. The topic of necropolitics is new to me, but it really does speak to that, those systems that, of course, were built here in South Africa during apartheid and are continuing around our Koeberg nuclear power station. And the potential of these very serious international crimes, I think we got a real glimpse into that with some of the presentations that we saw. And, you know, in my research while preparing for today, I looked at how the IAEA has responded to what's been going on at the power station in Ukraine. I'm not going to try and pronounce the name. I like the way you sidestepped it. But you won't be able to understand what I'm saying anyway if I tried. So, but I saw that the chief did mention that they want to create an exclusion zone around the power station in Ukraine to prevent this kind of absolute disaster going on, but there just isn't, that's not happening yet. And the fear around the supply of fuel there and what that can mean in a time of conflict. And this linking, this weaponization of a nuclear power station in conflict, we have not seen before. Previously, there's been an intellectual separation between energy generation and conflict, or at least in the formal spaces. And so we don't often talk about our challenges at Koeberg here in South Africa as being a geopolitical issue. But as you heard from Lydia and from others before, we've seen how risky, it's an additional set of risks that we don't often talk about here. And what's happening in Ukraine shows us that it's no longer extreme to think of a nuclear power station as being a weaponized facility. And that's extremely frightening. And we know also that with nuclear power stations, just as Lydia has been telling us, that these bilateral secret agreements around stations can lead to enrichment towards weapons. We can see also that other countries are now looking at creating nuclear weapons and other equipment. And it is a concerning time for all of us, I think, especially when we look at what's happening at Koeberg with the extension of the life for another 20 years. It's very concerning, considering the kinds of verbal escalations that are going on around the nuclear power station in Ukraine. Because South Africa is the only country in Africa that has a nuclear power station, and we previously had a bomb that we dismantled during the transition to democracy, I think it's really important as we talk about peace, what is it that we can do as civil society to really foster and continue to move towards peace, so that we're not sitting in a situation where
we continue to get overly engaged into the geopolitics with Russia. What is it that we can do so that we are not being used as a tool to foster those influences, as Lydia was speaking to? And regardless of what happens at Koeberg, if we are successful in stopping the extension of the power station, the waste still sits there. And we need to look more at who are we in agreement with in terms of processing the waste. Again, something that Lydia touched on. I don't know if it is Rosatom. I'd be interested to know if they are the ones. And I just also want to comment on, I was very fortunate to get some input for what I'm contributing today. One of the things that someone said to me was that looking at this joint military arms parade that just went on between South Africa, Russia, and China here in South Africa, this naval display doesn't suggest that South Africa really is non-aligned. And it's kind of speaking out of both sides of its mouth. And we would like our government to be clear on its position in terms of the conflict in Ukraine. I think it has really let us down in terms of recognizing sovereignty and peaceful coexistence. And I also think we need to look in much more detail at what we're doing with our waste and how that's being used. And we often are concerned about it just being put in the ground as we were hearing, this sort of burial site of this extremely toxic waste. But it may also be like the risen dead coming to haunt us in these sort of zombie weapons that are so dangerous as well. So that was just really the summary that I wanted to offer today. From what I heard today, the thinking that I wanted to bring to the meeting, there's much more to learn and to hear from each other. And I know many people online are extremely knowledgeable. And so it's a great privilege to be with you all. And I'm meant to facilitate this next stage. Before I start with the questions online, I did receive one in a WhatsApp chat that I want to share with you all. If I can just find it. 1 second. So this was from someone who wasn't able to join us today, but she had a particular interest. And there was a bit of a conversation online, but maybe we can bring that also into this space. Firstly, how do we move towards peace? I think that's an absolute critical issue. How do we make sure indeed that nuclear power stations don't become weapons of war? That idea of the international criminal nature of this, is this something that we need to really push for as a collective, as civil society globally? But also there's a question here about depleted uranium and how would, sorry, I'm just trying to see what the question is, that depleted uranium has a low radiation risk. So there's some questions around that and how it's being used in South Africa as well. So if anyone has any inputs on that, it would be appreciated. We've got an audience here in the room and then those online. If you do want to contribute, please do respond, or maybe Lydia, you'd like to take that question.
Can I do further questions?
Yes.
All I know about the what I most know is about the spent fuel. I would rather defer the question about the depleted uranium over to UAZA.
UAZA? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also want to commend both Francisca and Lydia for the insightful comments for this afternoon. The depleted uranium issue, I am not too much aware of where exactly that is. Of course, we know that at Valputz, the South African radioactive waste disposal facility, of course, certain grades of radioactive waste go to Valputz. But the other issue that is also of concern is, of course, the high enriched uranium that South Africa is purported to still own. And this is one of the questions that I think is also underlining the US's hardline position on South Africa regarding the fuel. South Africa has not been forthcoming in terms of what highly enriched uranium it still has. That is one of the biggest secrets, I suppose. But the fact is that the South African government has declared uranium as a strategic mineral. We have a national nuclear energy policy that from 2008 still stands. And in that, government has committed to the beneficiation of that, and of course, to get the whole uranium cycle, ideally, here in South Africa. But the question of uranium is, of course, lingering. Even Valput, as we know, the radioactive waste facility is overcrowded as it is. And there are plans from the newly established National Radioactive Waste Disposal Institute that there are efforts afoot for a larger expansion of that. Now, I suppose that could also be adjacent to Valput, but clearly we know that from typically geological disposal facilities, the earth is not as quiet as it is. Particularly in that area around Namaqualand, which is a specific region of South Africa, there has been earthquakes, etc. I've taken a long time, Lydia. I've only addressed a little bit of that, but clearly we need to discuss this issue of depleted uranium much more, and of course the fact that we still do have highly enriched uranium. Let me stop here and of course take follow-up questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jansi. I mean, you are so knowledgeable. It's just wonderful to meet you, and thank you. I just want to pause for a moment because we've just seen that Ulrich has joined us from EarthLife Africa Johannesburg, and we're very pleased to have you with us, Ulrich, and we would really appreciate a contribution from you if you are in a place that you're able to contribute. I know you were out in the field somewhere, so Ulrich, are you able to unmute and speak with us? I'm not sure if he is, but we'll just wait and see. It's great that he was able to join us. While we're waiting for Ulrich, hopefully to be able to speak, I'm just going to look back in the questions. And I can see that Penelope is asking about what about the rights of future generations and this dealing with nuclear waste for many thousands of years. And I don't know if this audience or the people here have looked at the issue of ecocide as an international concept. I think that there's a very strong link between the impact of nuclear, its waste, its role in conflict and so on with ecocide. And I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to look at that as a international treaty within the UN bodies. And maybe someone here, Joanne, see, I'm looking at you again, or maybe someone else might like to contribute on that topic and whether that's something that has been explored. Please also people in the room, I know you are all very knowledgeable. We've got 2 hands up in the room. All right, here you can have one of these wonderful little things. First up is Wayne Duplessis, also from SAFCEI. Welcome, Wayne. I don't think you guys can see him, unfortunately, but maybe you want to stand in front of the camera.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. My question is while I think we've established and we've spoken about Koeberg and the waste generated by that plant, I also want to just ask a question, and maybe Janti is the right person to ask around the Pelindaba research facility as well. You know, I think that always gets left behind because it's not necessarily the one that we focus on, and it's sort of framed as inverted commas research only and medical research and all kinds of things. So I just want to get sort of thoughts and opinions around any dangers around that plant as well, because I think that's also just an interesting conversation. Again, someone in the room might actually know the answer already. So thank you. I'll pass along. Thanks.
Thanks, Wen. Do you want to, Sele as well, go while we've got you on the screen?
Thank you so much. My name is Sele, and I am the lay leader for social justice at the Cape Town Unitarian community. So I'm involved as an interfaith leader with regards to these kinds of issues. And I'm so grateful to be here with the Ukrainians. And I love how Artem was mentioning earlier that to know that people so far away are concerned with the same problems that we are facing. So with regards to some of the issues that the Ukrainians have raised for us and the experiences and stories that they have shared, my question is really a challenge to put to us, to say that, you know, for SAFCEI, for Koeberg Alerts Alliance, for Ukrainian Association of South Africa, when and how can we actually meet and come together on the streets instead of being hidden away in a building where people don't actually realize the important things that we're talking about here, so that we can actually raise awareness, you know, with the public. One of the things that's really standing out for me is that we speak about the governments are doing this. The Russian government is doing that. The Ukrainians are doing this. South Africa is doing this. But it doesn't actually reflect the will of the people. And so I really want to challenge all of us that in some way, if we can do something where we are, first of all, raising awareness among the average citizens, and then secondly, to really highlight what the will of the people is, that it isn't in fact to be killing each other, it isn't in fact to be trying to control each other, that it's actually that we are coming together across the waters to say, how can we support each other? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks so much. This hybrid session is incredibly high tech. I don't even know which screen to be looking at. So thank you so much to the organizers of this wonderful event as well. You have really impressed us enormously and really helped smooth the conversation between all of us. I'm very conscious that a lot of our audience are not English first speakers. So, and that's both in South Africa and in Ukraine. So I hope I'm speaking slowly enough. I don't know if there's simultaneous translation going on, but I guess your English is better than my Ukraine. So on to the questions. Jancy, I suspect that you're going to be up again, but I want to just give anyone else in the virtual room an opportunity. Please raise your hand if you would like to make a contribution. And also Lydia, of course, also. Lydia, would you like to go first?
I'd like to touch on what Sally has said about creating awareness. If I look back at the LTO, which is the long-term operation, when the nuclear regulator came out and said the public at large can now comment on the life extension of Koeberg. They gave us some time to, like Sally also said to me, gather the troops to do a comment. But not many people were aware at the time of what actually the comment was about. And I think the awareness should be made with communities affected. And it's not only the communities living around Koeberg, it is a national issue. When we look at the waste that is still harbored at Koeberg on site, if we look at the waste that's been transported to the community of Valpoets. So the awareness that we all want is for the public at large, like she said, to be aware of the situation at Koeberg, what risks are involved, not only for the environment, but as well as for the people living there. And I think that civil society needs to come together and not work in silos, and this one wants to address that and that one wants to address that. The common goal here should be the people and their safety, the environment and the safety, and let us all work together as a unit and work on this thing of creating awareness and giving that to the communities. Thank you.
That's a fantastic point. How do we each contribute to that? I also love Sally's idea of getting out onto the streets. Maybe we need to have a day of solidarity between Ukraine and South Africa, and that's something we need to figure out when it would be a good time. So maybe that's some homework for some of us here. What can we do as civil society to respond? Okay, I see Brian has his hand up. Fantastic. Hi, Brian. Please welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Hi, yeah. I think the city touched on it, and I think that we need to, and I've been putting it on emails to various people, that we really need to start building a national anti-nuclear campaign again in South Africa, because various role players are promoting nuclear energy again, and also learn from the lessons of Ukraine of having large nuclear plants in times of conflict and the dangers of that, and start sharing that with the public and other centers, not just Cape Town, but Durban, Johannesburg, etc., and some of the outlying areas. With the PBMR, I'm showing my age now, we campaigned across the country, and we stopped that, and there was legal action as well. We might have to take legal action against our government again, and we need to prepare for those struggles in the time to come. And the only way we can do this is by building solidarity around that. So I was saying, and Slava Ukraine.
Heroyam Slava. There was a question that we didn't really answer on how we can move towards peace. And I think it was mentioned today that South Africa gave up a nuclear weapon, and the Ukraine also gave up a nuclear weapon in 1994. It was the world's third largest arsenal, and in return, Russia, United States, and the United Kingdom took responsibility to protect its territorial integrity and sovereignty. So our countries have made a bold decision to actually take down the nuclear weapon for better situation for our planet. And I think we have something to say to the world that this was a strong point that our governments at the time made, and this should not be taken for granted. And I believe that South Africa has to stand today with Ukraine just on a matter of that fact only, because we have joined non-proliferation movement. We have taken a proactive decision to make this world safer. And in retrospect, now Ukrainians feel like maybe this was a bad decision. So it's a very, very dangerous message that we are sending to the world. And also on the solidarity and on the need to go to the street, I think we should also just acknowledge that it's a luxury that we can still sit in our places, because as the situation in Ukraine was proven that at the moment, every single person has to defend their country. It's not anymore a choice. It's unfortunately, everybody is forced to be to defend and to act because this is a question of future generation, of today's generation, of personal surviving of your loved ones. And I think we understand that here, and the people in South Africa, I think, also understand that and know what it is to be forcefully resilient, that when you are forced to be resilient. Maybe I'll also allow Artem, if you are here, if you would like to just any closing remarks. Otherwise, I can see that Ulrich once again connected. If your connectivity allows to speak for 1 to 2 minutes. Otherwise, I think we've received a lot of questions, and I think what we will have to do as organizers probably to take them down and to reflect and maybe to continue this conversation. I know there was already a discussion to organize a similar event on the 26th of April, the day when the Chernobyl nuclear disaster happened. So we can plan towards that, organizing and bringing people, those who want to know and understand more, and those who are willing to show their solidarity together.
Yeah, it's very close to the same as the 26th of April. It's when we had our court ruling on the 1 trillion nuclear deal in South Africa. So we can work together. That's a very auspicious date. And maybe they thought of it back then. So yes, let's see what we can do. Absolutely. It's 6 years since that court case was, the deal with Russia was declared illegal and unconstitutional. Thank you. There's a request here for the PowerPoints, also from Peter. And it looks like the online audience is enthusiastic. That's fantastic. Ulrich, if you are able to make a contribution, we would love to hear from you. So please unmute yourself. But maybe we should do a round robin of just finishing off. Joansi, would you like to go?
Yes, thank you very much, Francesca, and also to commend the work that you have done about the nuclear deal. I think we should remind the current government of what it has said just before the elections in 1994, that no more decisions in smoke-filled dark rooms, is that conspiracy and secrecy cannot flourish in light. And it is not about South Africans not wanting to progress and wanting to have high-skilled, high-tech jobs. It is about what is being done with our money and what is being done about future generations. So I think let us take this forward, and I'm mindful of the time. But first of all, there is so many lessons that we can and must learn from Ukrainians. In the midst of war, they are organizing themselves, not only responding to being called up to protect their country, but we've seen that how humanity comes through. And this is our responsibility. We cannot only be a democracy on paper, but we also need to be one in practice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, if I reflect back to the LTO for Koeberg, I asked the question, is this it? Is nothing else, can nothing else be done? And I was thinking back to the question that I've asked and the answer that I got to that the actual work is only starting now. Because now, if the LTO is granted, we will be saddled with another 20 years of waste. That there is no final safe disposal for that nuclear spent fuel. And the government is intent, like Antti has said, that it is going to falpouts. Those communities then hasn't been consulted about having this nuclear waste on their doorstep. So I think for us here in South Africa, the work is only starting now. That we have to push back to what the government is actually saying, that it's quite all right for the waste to go there. It is not okay. If we look at Palindaba, I think Wayne asked that question, is it safe? And I do not know much about Palindaba, only that it is a research facility, but it is some research that is too much. We don't need that. What we do need is to go on track with renewables, a clean and safe for our environment, and let us all work together to get rid of this government's intention of storing the waste at falpouts and continuing with a nuclear program.
Thanks, Lydia. Francesca, and you.
Thanks. I just feel just really thankful and privileged again. I just want to repeat my appreciation for everyone here and really this cyclical nature of this. Sometimes I think we feel a bit despairing about that, but there's so much knowledge in this room and also within the past nuclear movement in South Africa and with our Ukrainian friends that we can really tap into. I know that there are people who have information about Pelindaba, about the health impacts there. There were some studies done. So there is knowledge out there if we have the capacity and the appetite to take this forward. You know, usually there's a couple of us small NGOs who are involved, but really we rely so much on the huge knowledge of, in SAFCEI's case, the faith leaders that we work with, and the academic community and many, many other tremendously knowledgeable nuclear activists here in South Africa and around the world. And so I just really want to pay tribute for all of you who do volunteer your knowledge to us, because that's the only way that we can do this work together. So that's all I wanted to say, is that I do think there's a lot we can do. And I absolutely agree with Lydia. This is not the end, it's the beginning. And there's a great deal of work to be done. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. I just wanted to remind that this conversation is recorded and it's available on YouTube, on the Ukrainian Association and SAFCEI and Koeberg Alert social media. So please share with those who you think gonna benefit from listening to this conversation. And thank you for joining us today.